Thanks for joining me today to learn how to make a chalkboard hidden message card. Here's a list of all the materials that I use, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions. So we'll gather all of our materials together. We have 5 pieces of paper to start with. We'll start by adhering our designer series paper. And this is going onto our card base. The card base is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. This designer series paper is cut at 4 by 5 1/4. I'm using the Stampin' Seal to adhere it down. If you happen to use liquid glue, I suggest to use it sparingly on thinner papers like designer series paper. It could cause warping. The wood paneling on this paper is amazing. The detail, there's lots of different shades as well. I'm taking this next piece of cardstock. Again, this is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 and scored in half at 2 3/4. I'm using a bone folder to get a nice crisp fold. Again, using my Stampin' Seal. This is just an awesome little applicator of double-sided tape. It's really sticky. Great for permanent adhesion. And now I'm going to adhere it to the back of the silver foil cardstock. And this is how we're creating this hidden message behind the chalkboard. So we're going to adhere the black cardstock on top of the silver, and this makes it look like a chalkboard. But before I do that, I'm going to show you how I stamped these sentiments and how I added a little bit of white ink to make it look even more like a chalkboard. This tool is called the Stamparatus. There are many different stamp positioning tools out there. It's really ideal for when you're making many cards that are the same and you need to do repeating stamping. I also like it because you don't always get a clean stamp impression. And so with this tool, you can stamp in the exact same spot multiple times to make sure you get a nice impression. So I'm inking up the stamps now and pressing it down. You don't need a lot of pressure. I'm adding one more layer of ink here for a more vibrant white. Another option I don't show you is using heat embossing and a white heat embossing powder. But this craft ink by Stampin Up is a great alternative if you don't have heat embossing powder. I'm now taking a sponge and getting a little bit of the ink, the white ink. I'm going to put it on scrap paper first to test how much ink is coming off of the sponge. And once I'm happy with it, I can just spread it around in a very random pattern. Nothing precise here. Now before you adhere it down, for my class kit specifically, you want to make sure that depending on whether you use the pumpkin or the apple, that you're selecting the right sentiment to match. So in the top right corner, if you're using the apple, you want to make sure that the "to an A+ teacher" is in the top right corner. And if you're using the pumpkin, then making sure that the "hey there, pumpkin" is in the top right corner. So when you're ready, go ahead and adhere it down. And I always like to caution, before you stick it down, make sure to open up your card piece, so that way you know you're adhering it in the correct orientation, in the correct way. Next, I'm going to show you how to use alcohol markers, the Stampin Blends, to color in this pumpkin. I use the light color first, and you'll notice that there's no precision here. I'm just scribbling away, adding a nice light layer. Then, using some basic knowledge of shading, I shaded along the bottom and along each ridge of the pumpkin. Once I added the dark, I go back over it with the light pen. And when you go over the light with the dark and then again with the light, it naturally blends. Now what I didn't show you here is that you actually want to stamp this on a scrap piece of white paper, and you can use a punch to simply punch out this stamp. It leaves this white border, and I think on a lot of card styles this looks wonderful. But if that's not your style, you can also do what crafters call fussy cut. And that's just taking a nice pair of sharp scissors, these are specifically craft scissors, and cut off that white edge. Next, I'm going to show you guys how to die cut and emboss these beautiful silver leaves. I'm using a Cricut Cuttlebug. There are a handful of other machines out there, including one from Stampin Up that is releasing on September 1st. So the sandwich that I use is my A plate, my magnetic cutting plate, my most used and loved B plate. It's the one that I constantly cut into. I put down the silver foil sheet. I position the dies so that I don't waste a lot of the cardstock. And then on the top is another B plate. I'm going to run this through my machine. It's a manual crank. I run it forward and back. Takes just a few seconds. And now you'll see these metal thin dies. They cut out and emboss these beautiful silver leaves. So now we'll set those to the side. And let's finish assembling our card. I'm going to use a Stampin' Seal again. And then you want to adhere it down. You can center it, you can off-center it, depends on your preference. And you can see that it opens up. And now, depending on what you selected for this class kit, whether that's the pumpkin or the apple, we're going to use foam dimensionals to pop up this little piece of paper to give a little bit more depth to your finished card. Make sure to place it over that bottom left sentiment. And this little extra branch piece that was also cut out, with a thick side down, that's ideal for the pumpkin. And for the apple, you can put the thick side up. I've tried it both ways. I feel like that's my personal preference. Again, this is your card. You make it your own. Again, I'm going to cut off the little white edge. And then using tweezers and liquid glue, I'm going to pick up this little branch, apply a little dab of glue, and then adhere that down to the pumpkin. Now for this last step, I'm going to play around with these silver leaves and see how I want to position them on my finished card. And in reality, you could have laid down the leaves ahead of putting your pumpkin down with the dimensionals. This would probably give you a little bit more flexibility as you're placing them. And you'll see here that I'm using a single glue dot on the back side of each of the little die cuts. These little glue dots are really useful for quick, permanent adhesion. You see, I definitely kept playing around with the orientation before I finally set it down. And there's the finished card. Thank you for joining me today for this card tutorial using the Harvest Hellos stamp set and the Gathered Leaves die set.